And now, my friends, for the remainder of this special end of the year, New Year's Eve, episode 199b, let's get to the main site and let's look at MediaMonarchy.com. From the Washington Post, U.S. government storing info on Americans in vast surveillance database. 9 years after the terror attacks of 2001, the United States is assembling a vast domestic intelligence apparatus to collect information about Americans using the FBI, local police, state homeland security officers, and military criminal investigators. The system, by far the largest and most technologically sophisticated in the nation's history, collects, stores, analyzes information about thousands of U.S. citizens and residents, many of whom have not been accused of any wrongdoing. The government's goal is to have every state and local law enforcement agency in the country feed information to Washington to buttress the work of the FBI, which is in charge of terrorism investigations in the United States. Other democracies, like Britain and Israel, to name two, are well acquainted with such domestic security measures, but for the United States, the sum of these new activities represents a new level of government scrutiny. This article is building on their investigative work called Top Secret America, which we covered several weeks ago on MediaMonarchy.com. This is just another follow-up. And again, just another bit that just further solidifies the things we really already knew, and we can go ahead and make the WikiLeaks comparison there, that yes, important information is coming out and it's helping us to codify and help double up the information. But ultimately, is it really that groundbreaking of information? A lot of these things, such as many other ways, you've heard it from the alternative media for years, but they're treated as crazy, fringe conspiracy theorists. However, somehow always turns out to be correct. Let's shift now to an amazing 45-minute documentary from Al Jazeera and their series Empire. The latest episode is called Hollywood and the War Machine. War is hell, but for Hollywood, it's been a godsend, providing the perfect dramatic setting against which courageous heroes win the hearts and minds of the movie-going public. The Pentagon recognizes the power of these celluloid dreams and encourages Hollywood to create heroic myths, to rewrite history to suit its own strategy, and as a recruiting tool to provide a steady flow of willing young patriots for its war. What does Hollywood get out of this deal with the devil? Access to billions of dollars worth of military kit, from helicopters to aircraft carriers, enabling filmmakers to make bigger and more spectacular battle scenes, which in turn generate more box office revenue, providing they accept the Pentagon's advice and even toe the party line and show the U.S. military in a positive light. So, is this a case of art imitating life, or sinister force using art to influence life and death and the public perception of both? We'll first make mention, of course, that it's interesting Al Jazeera uses the term sinister force, because we use the term sinister forces many, many times to discuss the things in the media monarchy kingdom that don't have an easy explanation. And of course, Sinister Forces is the title of the 3-book series from author, researcher Peter Levenda, and that to this day still stands as my most #1 downloaded episode. That interview from last October on MediaMonarchy.com with Peter Levenda, the author of Sinister Forces, where we discussed at the time the bizarre intersection of Roman Polanski and Charles Manson and all of those things that swirl around. As long as we're mentioning that, I'll also mention, amazingly, my episode 199 from just 2 weeks ago on December 17th, where we had in-studio guest Tracy Twyman discussing the alchemy of money. That has now become my #2 most downloaded episode. #2 with a bullet. And exactly why that is, I can't really say. I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons, such as the draw of Tracy Twyman, such as the end of the year, and a lot more folks are online. However, I also think it may have something to do with that was my most recent episode available when RedIceCreations.com published our interview. So hopefully it is a little bit of all of those things that brought people to the site. However, That's a sidebar, and we're discussing Hollywood and the war machine. And we add some of the links in this story that really do flesh out this story. You can go back to 2005 on USA Today to discuss Hollywood and the Pentagon. There's a Time magazine article from '86, which begins by discussing the hot new movie at the time called Top Gun. And, of course, folks like Tony Scott and Ridley Scott and Michael Bay and all the others are notorious for working hand in glove with the military media industrial complex. There's the book, which you can see the artwork for the Hollywood War Machine, U.S. Militarism and Popular Culture from Carl Boggs and Tom Pollard. We also have a link to a Mother Jones article, and we also have a link to another full-length documentary on Google Video, one of the few things that remains on video.google.com, Operation Hollywood. And we also have a Truth Dig article from 2008. Many of these noting, perhaps not so explicitly as Truth Dig does, but of course, Hollywood and the War Machine have been quite cozy for quite some time. So again, I implore you to check out this episode of Empire from Al Jazeera, Hollywood and the War Machine. And again, my friends, these are the kind of things that we want to try and get more and more into discussing on MediaMonarchy.com, putting more media into the monarchy, if you will. However, speaking of media, and something we did briefly discuss on NewWorldNextWeek.com, and that is our own Federal Communications Commission. FCC got the votes to pass their net neutrality rules. And of course, they're confident that net neutrality is legal, but let's take this now, a little bit dated story from the Wall Street Journal. The top communications regulator won support to pass contentious new rules for internet traffic, a move likely to face legal challenges and face uncertainty about internet regulation, rather create uncertainty about internet regulation. The FCC approved rules by Chairman Julius Genachowski governing net neutrality, a concept aimed at preventing internet providers from interfering with web traffic. The rules are expected to bar providers from discriminating against legal internet traffic and require more transparency. They would also let broadband providers for the first time charge more to companies that want faster service for delivery of games, videos, and other services. Net neutrality has become a contentious issue as worries grow that large phone and cable companies are growing too powerful as internet gatekeepers. Startups and small businesses that rely on the internet to provide shopping information or other services to consumers are particularly concerned, just as are farmers with the passage of the food safety bill. So many of these things we see, regardless of which area of society you want to discuss. They, the elites, the bloodlines, the multi-generational serial killers, the gangsters and the banksters, they cause the problems. So it's problem, reaction, solution. They cause the problems to get the reaction out of us to give us the solution that they wanted in the first place. But they cause the problems, but we suffer. So whether that's their shoddy security that lets people on terror watch lists get on planes and then have a drill turn live where underpants set on fire, or God knows what else. They cause the problems. Their factory farms cause the problems, but it's going to be ours to bear the weight of. You know, all surplus is privatized and all the debt is socialized. The interesting thing that tied in with the very moment that these new FCC rules were passing is at that very moment, and we do have the link to Reuters, Skype was hit by a worldwide outage. Recovery stalled as millions complained. And that was why we didn't have a New World Next Week on the previous week. That was just the final nail in that coffin. And that's what we try and do. We try and go through the news, and we try and put it in a little bit of order, and we try and cross-reference things to where it makes sense for you. Again, I'm not the smartest in the world. I'll go ahead and quote our closing song that we're going to hear a little bit later. I may have been born yesterday, but I stayed up all night. I'm going and learning and trying to do it the best I can. So again, you have to do more research for yourself. Let's now shift to our last bit of Econocrash updates, the audacity of austerity. And again, some of these go back going through the previous week as we did not have a live show last week on Christmas Eve. The audacity of austerity being named the word of the year, and we noted that very early, and we even noted it last year when we first heard it from historians and economists and folks like Webster Tarpley and Gerald Celente and others, that austerity was going to be the phrase that pays or doesn't pay, depending on which way you look at it. Austerity meaning measures passed by the government due to their own cronyism and failings in printing money out of thin air and their connections to the central banks. But we have to tighten our belts. Furthermore, it was an unhappy birthday as far as we're concerned for the Federal Reserve, going back to, good Lord, I don't know how many years it was, but we just did recently discuss the birthday of the Federal Reserve and how all the guys snuck back for their little anniversary because they all snuck away to Jekyll Island. PopSci.com getting into ultra-thin circuits in banknotes could give electronic security to paper currency. As WikiLeaks prepares for bank exposure, federal regulators cringe. That's from allgov.com. Overstock CEO has added RICO allegations to his ongoing lawsuit versus Goldman and Merrill. More on that from Reuters, and more on that from peacerevolution.org, where they interviewed several months back the CEO of Overstock, who knows exactly what's going on in the new financial world order. And we do have that link for you. That was Peace Revolution episode number 5, Overstocked, the interview with Overstock CEO Patrick Byrne. Dutch consider outlawing a call for bank run. That's from the CNBC. Halliburton paid Nigeria $250 million to drop charges against Cheney. And I believe the latest I've heard is that someone in Nigeria pointed out that, yeah, that's illegal. Speaking of illegal, CIA secretly agreed to pay $5 million to shield Mitchell and Jessen. Those would be at least the front men, the architects for the waterboarding program. And our last note on this Econocrash update posting the audacity of austerity. A 27-year-old Citigroup banker allegedly jumped to her death from Trump Palace in New York City. More on that from Cryptagon.com. And there you have it, my friends. Econocrash updates, Hollywood and the war machine, the FCC rules, and of course, Top Secret America. Just some of the things we're tracking in the world of alternative news and open source intelligence. And again, I'll remind you, my name's James Evan Pilato. I'm your host and webmaster of the site and show, MediaMonarchy.com, coming to you from the home studios of Media Monarchy in the Pacific Northwest here in Portland, Oregon, on the last day of the year, December 31st, 2010. I guess it wasn't the year we made contact, but 2011 will no doubt be interesting, and we're going to have to see where it goes from there. This is the B-side episode of 199 from MediaMonarchy.com.